Welcome to WION Health Resort. Make your reservation at WION.com.
Vielleicht nur als Imposant.
Hello and welcome to WION. You're watching the West Asia Post. I'm Hem Kaur Saroya. 6 months into the war, Israel is getting increasingly isolated. Its recent actions in Gaza, especially the killing of 7 aid workers, invited backlash from all of its allies. The IDF also struck Iranian targets in Syria, raising chances of the war spilling over. Lots lined up for you on the show, but first, the headlines.
The United Nations Human Rights Office has said that attacks against people or objects involved in humanitarian assistance may amount to war crimes. Statement after 7 World Central Kitchen volunteers were killed in Israeli strike. The United Nations grants approval for the transfer of thousands of additional bombs to Israel, although they will not be delivered until at least next year. The approved transfer includes Mk-82 and Mk-80 bombs. Turkish authorities arrest 2 people believed to be working for Israeli intelligence. The police in a social media post said that total 8 people captured till now are believed to be collecting and selling information to Israeli intelligence about targeted individuals and companies in Turkey. 6 out of the 8 are out on parole. Kuwait holds first parliamentary election under the new emir. The new leader says he's determined to push through economic reforms after protracted deadlock between appointed governments and elected parliaments.
The United States, UK and now Germany. Israeli allies are openly critical of its actions in Gaza. The recorded death toll, it's crossed 32,000, the highest in any recent conflict. Israeli allies are now considering putting conditions for further military aid to the country. Our top story for this episode, we tell you how the Gaza war might just cost Israel its allies.
The Biden-Netanyahu phone call was as close as it could have gotten to the come-to-Jesus moment. On Thursday, the American president held talks with Israel's wartime leader. It was the harshest tone the American president has taken against his Jewish ally in the war. The message was clear: avoid civilian deaths and do more to let aid into Gaza if you want continued support.
With regard to our policy in Gaza, look, I'll just say this. If we don't see the changes that we need to see, there'll be changes in our own policy.
The relationship is changing, clearly. We've gone from a hug to a handshake to a slap on the wrist today. The relationship has evolved from full support for Israel, its right to defend itself. But as Secretary Blinken said at the start, how you do this matters. And it's mattering more and more.
This is the first time since October 7th last year that America threatened conditional support for Israel's offensive in Gaza. The stern warning followed an Israeli airstrike that killed 7 volunteers working with the World Central Kitchen. The non-profit organization's operations in Gaza have been halted since the attack. The group's founder, Jose Andres, has accused Israel of systematically targeting aid workers.
So this was not just a bad luck situation where, we dropped the bomb in the wrong place or no, this was over 1.5, 1.8 kilometers with a very defined humanitarian convoy that had signs in the top, in the roof, a very colorful logo that we are obviously very proud of, but that's very clear who we are and what we do.
The deaths have increased pressure on Israel, from the US to UK and Germany. Its top allies want Israel to read the room. They want Israel to follow international law. Israel has called the incident a grave mistake. Its military officials have issued an apology and promised a high-level probe into the strike. Since the talks, Israel has approved the opening of 2 routes into Gaza to allow more humanitarian aid into the territory. The Erez Gate in northern Gaza will be temporarily reopened for the first time since the start of the conflict. And Ashdod port will also be opened for humanitarian deliveries. Washington has welcomed Israel's latest efforts to allow more aid into Gaza. But the US says success will be measured in terms of aid reaching those desperately in need.
Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah.
Meanwhile, tensions remain high with rival Iran. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei has promised a slap-on-the-face response after Israeli strikes on the Iranian consulate in Damascus killed at least 10 officials.
This failure of the Israeli regime in Gaza will definitely continue, as well as these desperate efforts like what they did in Syria. Of course, they will be slapped for this action.
Tehran
has vowed that its response would be of the same magnitude and harshness. And in its anticipation, Israel has suspended leave for combat units and heightened its air defense command to deal with possible missile or drone attacks from Iran.
Dissent is growing against Benjamin Netanyahu. Israelis want him out. The message is clear. Amid protests and anger, an Israeli opposition leader has called for an election this September. Our next report gets you all the details.
The crowd is growing at Israel's public squares. In between fighting a war, Israel is witnessing one of its biggest protests in 5 years. Tens of thousands continue to raise their voice against the wartime leader Benjamin Netanyahu, calling on him and his government to step down and let someone else take charge.
We need a new set of elections really urgently. We need them so we'll have a legitimate government. There's a lot of mistrust in whatever this government is doing.
Benjamin Netanyahu has been accused of dragging the war for his gains and obstructing a hostage deal only to keep his term at the top office.
I'm here together with thousands of people demonstrating against our government because we think that we have a government that failed in its position to protect Israel, and also in the way they are treating the people who were kidnapped and being held in Gaza for so long. And we think that we should have elections soon, and that our Prime Minister is not fit.
In the last few weeks, Israeli security officials have been using greater force to disperse protesters, like they did outside Netanyahu's residence. There is rising discontent among Israelis against Netanyahu. Recent surveys conducted by various pollsters suggest that. The latest poll, carried out by the Israel Democracy Institute this month, show that 57% of the public rates Netanyahu's performance as poor or very poor. while only 28% believe it is good or excellent. 14% assess his performance as so-so. The biggest name that can compete with Netanyahu is opposition's Benny Gantz, a former army general and a disgruntled ex-coalition partner. On Wednesday, National Unity Party leader Gantz called for national elections in a televised address.
I believe that the Israeli society needs to renew its contract with its leadership, and I think the only way to do it and still maintaining the national effort in fighting Hamas and terrorist group and other security challenges is by having an agreed election date that we have to discuss when and if. And I hope that my political partners and friends, and maybe some rivals as well, will agree to it, because I think it serves all the country and all its sectors in the same time.
Netanyahu rejected Gantz's call for early elections and said the current government will continue to rule until all war objectives are met. Between shows of opposition and large-scale protests, the thing that stands clear is that most Israelis want Netanyahu out. However, they still support the war in Gaza. They believe Hamas has to be wiped out as a threat, but with a different commander leading the army.
Local elections have ushered in a new face in Turkish politics. Re-elected Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu has stirred the pot. He is now being seen as the only serious challenger against strongman Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his AK party. Our next story gets you more.
From belonging to the strategic Black Sea region to having a childhood interest in football, there's a lot in common between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and newly re-elected Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu. İmamoğlu is emerging as the main challenger to Erdogan's reign, and his political trajectory too has been similar to the presidents who ran Istanbul in the 90s. In between similar journeys and ability to appeal voters, both players diverge when it comes to politics. Erdogan entered politics with an Islamist party and has reshaped the secular state with his pious vision since taking the reins in 2002. In contrast, İmamoğlu is from the staunchly secularist Republican People's Party. He joined the party in 2008 and became its mayor in Istanbul's Beylikdüzü district 10 years ago. On Sunday, the 53-year-old from the main opposition Republican People's Party, or CHP, defeated Erdogan's hand-picked candidate. The victory has been seen as a blow to Erdogan's AK party, which had sought to retake Istanbul and other key urban areas after losses in 2019.
I think the Turkish voters sent a clear message to Erdogan that enough is enough. And that even though a majority of these voters supported Erdogan in a series of elections for the last 20 years, Erdogan is no longer delivering. The economic downturn is eating away the party's base. So that was a clear message that if Erdogan does not get its act together and change his ruling party, this secular decline that we have experienced vis-a-vis AKP's vote share is going to continue. And I think it's a serious message because Turkey has an electoral authoritarian regime, and Erdogan's candidates already had the advantages of a tilted playing field, and yet they still lost.
İmamoğlu first won the mayor's seat in Istanbul 5 years ago. It was a symbolic victory that ended the president's 25-year rule of a city with the highest budget. But after this repeated victory, İmamoğlu has appealed to voters who blame Erdogan for the country's economic hardships.
İstanbul'un bu akşam.
Just as Istanbul gave us this historical message this evening, it also gave it to the government officials. The instructions given by the nation is that those who are elected to serve will respect those who are elected as well.
After facing defeat, the AK party stalwart Erdogan said that his ruling alliance did not achieve the desired result from Sunday's local elections and that they will carry out self-criticism and address shortcomings. Erdogan had earlier said that this is his last term in the Turkish top office. But polls don't happen until 2028, and until then, no direct competition is expected between the former and current Istanbul mayor.
From Turkey to Iraq, Gulf nations are testing the waters for a possible investment in Iraq. Baghdad is slowly recovering from years of conflict. It will be hosting the Arab League summit next year. A chance for the country to prove it is now safe and in control. Take a look.
This is the future home of the Rixos in Baghdad, a luxury hotel financed by Qatar in the city's heavily fortified green zone. Iraq hopes to host Gulf Arab monarchs and other Middle Eastern emissaries in the hotel's 470 luxury rooms and suites when they arrive for a planned Arab League summit next year. The Iraqi government has been pushing for more investments from the Gulf Arab states. After years of war and instability, Iraq is now benefiting from record oil revenues, which is therefore helping to spur demand for consumer goods from its rapidly growing population of at least 43 million. The country's top trade partners are currently China, Iran and Turkey. But Gulf Arab states which have had complicated relationships with Iraq have recently pledged a string of investments. Gulf leaders seek to grow soft power in a country where Iran has unparalleled influence. In 2023, Saudi Arabia said it had set aside $3 billion for investment in Iraq via its Public Investment Fund. It also announced a $1 billion mixed-use project, including offices, shops, and more than 6,000 residential units.
The encouragement of the government of President Mohammed Shia and the provision of all the appropriate climate for investment, the security and the stability we are witnessing in Iraq, as well as the confidence in the Iraqi economy coming strong in the next stage. All political security and economic conditions are prepared for promising investment, whether from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or from elsewhere in Iraq.
Gulf nations have also signaled growing interest in Iraq's energy sector, a key zone of influence for Iran, which supplies up to 40% of Iraq's power. More deals include developing oil production, carbon capture, power plants, natural gas fields, and a solar farm. Iraq is in the process of linking its power grid to Kuwait and in the future to Saudi Arabia. Questions remain over how Iran will react to Iraq's growing presence in the region, while an upswing of violence has highlighted the fragility of Iraq's relative stability. There have been more than 4 months of attacks by Iran-aligned armed groups on US forces stationed in Iraq. Many investors also have concerns about rampant corruption and stifling bureaucracy in Iraq. It has made everything from signing a contract to getting paid exceedingly difficult.
Iftar prayers are once again being heard from the Grand Umayyad Mosque in Aleppo. Aleppo was among the worst affected regions in the Syrian war. It's rebuilding slowly, one symbolic step at a time.
After a decade of lull, Iftar prayers are heard once again from the old Umayyad Mosque this Ramadan. The historic mosque located in Aleppo has been closed off since the Syrian government forces retook control of eastern and old Aleppo. This significant event marked a symbolic return to normalcy for the city's residents, who have endured years of conflict and destruction.
For more than 11 years, war uprooted the voice of this mosque. We were hurt and sad, but God willing, with the efforts of those workers who work on the mosque, it will return to the way it was, and the voices of the imams will rise again from this mosque to enter houses of Aleppo's people 5 times a day.
There was a grand show of unity and resilience put on display at the old mosque. A mass iftar meal was organized and more than 1,400 people from various fields and backgrounds were invited. The reconstruction and restoration work is still under process. Despite that, the community came together to break their fast in the mosque's yard. They were surrounded by the remnants of the past that are being meticulously preserved and restored to their former glory.
Our joy is big and indescribable to see the Adhan rise again from the big mosque.
The fighting in Aleppo ended in December 2016 when the Syrian army, backed by allies and proxies, overran the rebel sector after months of siege and bombardment. Syria's conflict, which began in 2011, has killed hundreds of thousands of people and driven millions from their homes. Aleppo was divided for years between zones held by the government and the rebels, and major part of its historic center were destroyed. The minaret of the mosque and covered markets that surrounded the mosque were destroyed in battles between the Syrian army and rebel fighters in 2012 and 2013. But despite suffering great damage, much of the mosque has survived.